Ever since the episode of Zeke's backstory from season 4, Zeke has been my favorite character in Attack on Titan. I mean, what's not to like about him? He's intelligent, he's selfless, and most importantly, he's a monkey. But recently I watched a video by Solar Sands about the idea of voluntary extinction, and as people in the comments pointed out, there were a lot of parallels between those ideas and Zeke Yeager. Now, normally I like keeping my videos lighter and I don't like taking myself too seriously, but I thought that these ideas were super interesting, so as a warning, this video will contain some heavy topics that go against our natural ways of thinking. So if you don't think you can handle that, then I wouldn't recommend watching this video. So Zeke is the son of Zeke Yeager and Dina Fritz. Grisha and Dina were members of a group called the Restorationists. Now these are a group of people that sought for the liberation of the Eldian people from the internment zones, and they believed that the history about the Eldians that Marley gave them was false. In order to achieve their goals, Zeke was pretty much used as a tool by his parents. His parents not only taught Zeke about the alternate history of the world, but also made Zeke join the warrior program so that he would inherit one of the Titan powers and further the goals of the Restorationists. Now, as you can imagine, having this pressure on you as a child is extremely unhealthy, especially when Zeke's heart wasn't truly with their plan. When Zeke starts falling behind, the pressure from his parents only grows larger, which in turn causes Zeke to fall further behind, pretty much causing a vicious cycle of his demise. That is until Zeke finds a savior in the former Beast Titan holder, Tom Saver. Now, like Zeke, Tom had a pretty tragic backstory. Tom fell in love with a Marleyan, and this caused him to have to pretend to not be an Eldian for several years. However, when she found out that he was an Eldian, she ended up taking her own life and her child's. Now you can see where their connection begins to form. In Tom, Zeke sees a father figure that he never properly had, and in Zeke, Tom sees a son that was taken away from him. However, Zeke is still failing in the warrior program, which is when Tom recommends to him that he sell out his parents as restorationists. By doing so, Zeke is not only freed from his parents' pressure, but he's also able to boost his ranks among the warrior candidates, putting him next in line to inherit the Beast Titan. However, before inheriting the Beast Titan, Zeke learns of Tom's tragic backstory, and ultimately he comes to the realization that if he wasn't born into this world, he wouldn't have to suffer. Okay, now that we're caught up on their backstories, I want to ask a question. What is the best way to end all of human suffering? Now you may come up with some elegant solutions to this, like maybe building infrastructure, education, and access to food and water in third world countries, raising awareness of social injustices, improving technology to make our lives easier. In reality though, the quickest and easiest way to end all of human suffering is voluntary extinction. Now Zeke and Tom both realize this, and they realize that the best way to stop the suffering of their people being essentially put into concentration camps is if they were never born in the first place to have to suffer. The Euthanasia plan. By taking away the ability to reproduce for the Eldian people, essentially the entire population will go extinct in just one generation, 100 years. Now what may surprise you is that this isn't an ideology that's contained in the fictional world of Attack on Titan. Antinatalism is the idea that procreation is morally incorrect. Now this idea actually goes back thousands of years, with mentions of some of these ideas being in the Bible, the Greeks, and even today there are some groups that still hold this idea, one of which being the Voluntary Human Extinction movement that essentially believes that this would prevent environmental degradation. One of its most prominent members being the one lady from the second Godzilla movie. The Shakers are a Christian sect that was completely celibate and gained new members only through adoption or conversion. Now, as you can imagine, this group quickly declined over time, but one of antinatalism's most prominent figures is Professor David Benatar, author of the book Better Never to Have Been. Now, some of the ideas that Benatar writes about are really interesting, but as I mentioned before, they deeply go against our natural ways of thinking, so this makes it prone to quick negative reactions. However, if you're interested in hearing a different viewpoint on an issue that you may not have even considered, then I think that there's a lot you can learn from Benatar's argument. Now, the first argument that he puts forth is that coming into existence is always a harm. The way in which he argues this is through what's called the asymmetry of pleasure and pain. It starts off with the assumption that pleasure is good and pain is bad. However, it then claims that the absence of pain is good, which makes sense, but the absence of pleasure isn't bad unless you're taking away that pleasure from someone. Thus, using this metric, the system that creates the greatest amount of good is one in which we do not exist at all. Now, you may be thinking that my life is pretty good and I don't really have that much suffering in my life. If you have a decent income level, some good relationships, chances are that you would say that your life is pretty good. However, according to Benatar's metric, that doesn't really matter because no matter where you are, you're going through some level of pain. Maybe you have some lower back pain, maybe you're hungry, maybe you're too hot or cold, or maybe you have a deadline for an assignment that you have to meet. Pretty much the only way to avoid all pains in life is by not existing at all. But if your life isn't overall good, doesn't this outweigh the pain? Well, Benatar argues that we tend to look at our lives a lot better than they actually are. Optimism and nostalgia are things that are built into our minds. From an evolutionary perspective, being optimistic allows us to get things done and perform way better in our daily lives, thus making those with these attributes better mates and making them more naturally selected. Not only that, you have no way of knowing if a future life thinks this way too. Most parents would choose not to bring a child to life if they have some serious disease that makes their lives full of suffering. But even for a normal child, we have no way of knowing if they would want to live a life with these pains, if they haven't been born yet. Now you may think that if this is all true, why shouldn't you end your own life? Well, the problem with this is that the process of death is usually extremely painful, no matter how you choose to do it. And this also violates his metric. Now, of course, there are many counters to antinatalist arguments. For example, one is in which we have a futuristic society which is devoid of all pain and suffering, using advanced technology, and having the best circumstances for people that are being born. Another counter is that if we go extinct, chances are intelligent life would evolve again from the world that we left behind, and thus they would have to go through way more suffering than we have known, if you consider all the brutality and injustices of the past. But the biggest counter is just that it's never going to happen. You'll never be able to convince everyone in the world to stop procreating. Even if it's outlawed, people will still create new life in secret. However, with Zeke's plan, he doesn't have to worry about convincing anybody. Going back to Zeke, his euthanasia plan makes a lot more sense when you look at it through the lens of the asymmetry of pleasure and pain. By continuing to bring people into life that have to suffer, you're creating more bad than good. And when you look at the backstory of Zeke and Tom Saver, you can see why they think that being born into this world is the solution that they came up with. Not only that though, in the world of Attack on Titan, the only way to prevent Eldian people from being killed in war or going into concentration camps is through this method, as one of the most prominent ideas in Attack on Titan is the cycle of hatred between the Marleyans and the Eldians. Now, I tried my best to explain antinatalism objectively, but if you want a much better explanation on these things, I would recommend watching Solar Sand's video on the topic. But anyways guys, that's pretty much it for this video. I also wanted to say that if you're a subscriber of my channel, I'm probably not going to be talking about Attack on Titan for a while, so if you subscribe for Attack on Titan related content, then feel free to unsubscribe. I want to talk about some other shows and manga on this channel, but I might revisit Attack on Titan again later with the extra panels that are going to be released for the final chapter in volume 34. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys later.